What is the difference between working for a public sector versus a private agency as a speech therapist? Now, I've worked for an agency for 2 years in the past, and I've now been with the Department of Education or the DOE for 4 years now, so I think I have a pretty good sense of the pros and cons for each. So that is the video that I'm going to be discussing today in a chronological way, from the hiring process all the way to long-term work-life balance, what that is like. This is going to be a battle between public sector versus private. So let's get right into it. Now, with the hiring process with agencies, there basically is no hiring process. And I say this because you are very, very coveted, and you are wanted by all of these agencies. And they know that there's a lot of agencies out there that so you have your pick. You can choose wherever you want to go. I remember when I was applying, I had 4 interviews lined up, and it was so funny because I was nervous as heck. I was sweating, but when I walked into each and every single one of them, it was almost like they were selling their company to me, and they were trying to give me reasons as to why I should sign with them instead of any other agency. I mean, it wasn't so obvious or outright, but it kind of was, because at the end of the day, like, they saw that I had graduated from an accredited program, I seemed normal and competent, and that's all that they could care about. Versus the hiring process for the DOE, I mean, that was very intimidating. I had 4 supervisors sitting in front of me asking question after question. It was like, I thought I was shaking. And I literally didn't think that I even get it either, because I was just so intimidated. But in comparison to the agency, the DOE was like an actual interview. Oh boy. So yeah, they just want to make sure that you are the right candidate to fill this role. And it makes sense because the DOE is very coveted by many people, and it's very competitive. So for the agency, I do also want to say that if you just send out an email, someone will reach out to you and you set up an interview right then and there. But for the DOE, it's a whole different system where you have to apply online through a specific website. I'll link it down below. And then after that, you're not done, because you need to then email the prospective supervisors in the specific district that you are interested in working in, and send them your resume and cover letter once again. And the only reason why you have to do this is because it's very easy for your application to kind of get lost in the system. I've heard some teachers and therapists saying that they haven't heard back for up to a year, if not more. So those are the differences. In terms of the hiring process, I think the DOE wins this one because they check for quality more than quantity, and they want to make sure that you are a good therapist and you know what you're doing. Now moving on to onboarding. Once you are hired, I remember for the agency, they sit you down and dedicate an entire day and a workshop to making sure that you are acclimated and you know exactly what you should be doing. They have frequent check-ins through email or phone just to see how things are going, if there's any way that they can provide you support. I remember when I was working for the agency, I had to submit this monthly Glow and Grow Google Sheets document, which is where I documented basically all the things that went well and the things that didn't go well for that month. And the whole point of that is so that they know how to support you better for the next month. And in general, the agencies are genuinely invested in keeping you happy. And if that means that they buy you lunch here and there, they have monthly meetings for networking and continuing ed courses, they do that for you. And that's the major difference that I've seen against the DOE, which when you start out, you, as a probationary therapist, you are matched with a mentor who basically is your go-to person anytime you have questions or concerns. But in general, the DOE, being the bureaucracy that it is, you are pretty much left on your own devices, and you don't really have that strong of a support. So in terms of onboarding, I think the agency wins this one because they are checking on you frequently, and they are there as resources. Now let's get to the fun stuff. Let's talk about money. So Agency, it is a flat fee for service. I want to say that when I was a clinical fellow, I got offered $52 an hour. And then once I got licensed, it was $62 for an hour. Now, this sounds great and all, but at the end of the day, it is a fee for service. What does that mean? It basically means that you are only being paid for the time that you service the student. So let's say a student is out, they're absent, you're taking your lunch, you are doing documentation. Those are times that you are not getting paid for. So what did that look like for me? That meant that I was working from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. with no lunch, no prep, no documentation time whatsoever, just doing straight therapy back to back to back. I personally decided that I did not want to take any breaks. I just had lunch on the go while picking up my next kid. It was just go, 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 go. And, other therapists, they didn't do this. They took their lunch. But for me, I just decided that I wanted to maximize my day, even though that meant I was working 10-hour days, 20 sessions per day. I know that sounds ridiculous and I don't know how I did it, but I did. And that basically meant that all of the other requirements that I had as in terms of documentation, report card writing, progress reports, IEP reports, all of that I did on my own personal time. And I was miserable because I was spending like 6 hours at a cafe on my weekends, writing them up and or on my commute home. And it was just a lot to keep up with. But in that same line of thinking, because it's fee for service, if I ever wanted to take a break, which I ended up doing this one random month that I was super overwhelmed, I decided to take a solo trip to California. But the thing is, I was able to do that because I'm in charge of my own time and I decided I don't care if I'm paid, I need a break. And I think that's the benefit that the DOE doesn't offer. The DOE is contractual time that you're working, so you ideally don't want to take vacation unless the school system is off. But with agencies, I was able to capitalize on vacation time off season. Now, as for the DOE, you get a salary, which is in a chart. It's very complicated, so I won't get into it. But because it's a public sector position, there is no room for negotiation to fight for higher pay or any of that sort. They basically take your years of experience and they kind of plop you in one of the parts of the chart. And if you want to increase your salary, there's something called a longevity, which means after 5 and 10 years, you get a salary bump. And also you can take courses to increase that base salary rate. The thing is, with New York City, we also get paid for Medicaid. So for each student that we basically have to bill their diagnosis and certify each and every single one. And for doing that, we get an extra $7,000 on top of our base salary. So the chart, you take that and then add $7,000, and that is basically your salary. And if you're curious of other people's salaries, there's a website called See Through NY where you can kind of see what people are getting paid. Although I do have to put an asterisk here that it's not accurate. I can confirm this. I just checked mine and it is not accurate, but it's still a good sense and idea of what the salary range would look like if you were to work for a DOE. So with the DOE, our union fights for a fair contract. And it's in our contract as of now to work a 6-hour, 20-minute day, which includes a 50-minute lunchtime, a 45-minute prep period, 30 minutes for CSIS documentation, which is where you write the session notes for the therapy sessions you had. And once a week for 50 minutes, you have an administrative period where you can use that time to basically write up reports. You can assess a kid, you can screen a student, see at-risk students, anything that falls in line of the requirements to effectively do your job as a therapist. On top of that, you are also capped at 8 sessions per day or 40 sessions per week. And anything beyond that, you are entitled to a per session pay because essentially you're giving up your prep period or any period that you are contractually guaranteed for. and you get, I think, $45 or $55 an hour for that. Don't quote me on that. In terms of work-life balance, with the agency, I did not have one. My personal time was not mine. I had to work overtime. I always took work home with me. I remember very distinctly in the agency, I was getting off of work at 6:30 sometimes, and it was always dark outside, and I never got to enjoy sunlight. And it, day after day of that, it kind of just adds up and gets to you. So the DOE gets a point for this one. Okay, now let's talk about benefits. And in this overarching umbrella of benefits, I'm going to be talking about health insurance, loan forgiveness, and tenure. So now starting with health benefits. With the agency, I had to pay, I think, around like $500 a month for health insurance, and it was pretty shitty even after all of that money. I gotta say, like, working in New York City at the time, I was very prone to accidents, and I think it was the hustle, go, 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 go culture, along with like the long work hours. I was spraining my ankle like constantly, and I remember I went to urgent care one day with my health insurance, and I had to pay like $200 for that kind of service, which was ridiculous, and it got to a point where it was just too much. I remember stopping my payments for the health insurance, and I just decided to go without health insurance. And lo and behold, like a month after, I sprained my ankle again, surprise, surprise. And I went to urgent care and I paid $100 without insurance. And I thought that was pretty confusing because you can imagine I felt pretty duped, because why is it that I'm paying so much in health insurance and it's more expensive to get services than without? It just didn't make sense to me. Versus the DOE, I do not pay a dime in health insurance. I went through a health scare a couple months ago, and I had to see a bunch of doctors, get a lot of procedures done, and at the end of it, I think I was looking at like multiple $1,000 bill, but nothing I paid was out of pocket. I had to pay like $10 here and there for a scan, but other than that, it was so reasonable. It feels so amazing and freeing to kind of have that as a security, to know that, God forbid anything happens, I have this insurance. So it's just, for my ease of mind, it's been a godsend. Health insurance, DOE takes the point on this one, not the agency. Now moving on to loan forgiveness. Now, if you work for a public sector like the DOE, you are entitled to loan forgiveness. Now, if you haven't done this already, I would apply for the SAVE plan, SAVE, because that is the surefire way to pay the least amount towards your loans. And after 10 years of service towards working for the public schools, the remainder of your loans, no matter how much it is, you will get forgiven. Now, all the time that I worked for the agency, it does not count for loan forgiveness, because at the end of the day, even though I worked at a charter school, my employer, the person who hired me, was the agency, and the agency is a private company, therefore it does not count. So it's just something to keep in mind. If you are trying to get on track for loan forgiveness, you would have to work for a public sector. Now, the last benefit that is unique to the DOE is something called tenure. And tenure is basically a safeguard that protects your civil rights, and you are entitled to a due process. Now, after 4 years of being rated as a satisfactory employee, you have an opportunity to submit a portfolio to the superintendent and basically, prove why and how you are an exemplary teacher. Basically, at that 4-year mark, you've proven your competence. God forbid anything happens, you are entitled to a process, and they have to hear your side, and the union can support you in representing you. Versus if you were an untenured teacher, basically they have every right to fire you without cause. So in that sense, it protects you long term. Although I gotta say, I have my own feelings and thoughts on tenure as a whole. But all this to say, I think it's still, rightly deserved for teachers who have worked hard for tenure at that point. So just to summarize, I've given you the differences between private and public sector. I can tell you that in a private sector, I had to be very careful of money management, in the sense that for the weeks that we had off for vacation, I'm not getting paid. And because I'm not getting paid, I had to hedge against an irregular pay schedule and prepare in advance and save accordingly. And I also saw that in an agency, they were more likely to treat the children and students in terms of numbers, because they were incentivizing a higher number of students on your caseload and the amount of sessions that you're doing. So in that sense, it was very hard to guard quality services. In that same sense that agencies are very business centric, I saw how they were working very, very long hours for their job. Because there are higher risks involved, and you can basically make as much or as little money as you control. As for the DOE, I see that because the union is there to fight for us, and there's a contract, there's more time in the day that we are guaranteed to complete the tasks, and in that sense, it's doing what you can within this 8 to 2 time frame. And in that same line, the DOE being the bureaucracy that it is, there is generally more red tape and there are more hoops that you have to navigate. A very clear example of this is that within the district, you are assigned a speech supervisor, and there are cases where I have a question and I don't know if I need to communicate this to my speech supervisor or my principal or my peers. It just gets very confusing navigating these hoops. But in that same light, I do see that the DOE offers so many benefits, like a network of people who are all working towards a collective goal. And I also see how they have more resources. Every year in the beginning of the school year, we get around $200 to spend on, supplies and resources for our students, and that's something that I didn't have with the agency. So all this to say, I think whether you're working for the public school system or an agency, there are risks for both. There are pros for both, cons for both, and I think at the end of the day, you have to make a decision that is right for you, and is in line with your values and where you are in your life right now. So I hope this video helped, and I would love to know if you are working for one of these or another setting and there's a motorbike driving by. But I hope this helped, and I would love to hear your thoughts and comments down below. Until then, I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.